I was hit without any warning, which shocked me completely. I was so surprised by it that I didn't even have time to respond before it happened. After a little while of quiet, I could hear the sound the parts made as they fell to the floor. After the ritual was over, we all felt a sense of tranquility. It felt like the hopes that had been dashed were now falling all around us. My glasses broke into pieces on the floor of the ballroom because someone knocked them off my face. This is what caused this catastrophe. The carpet on the ballroom floor is very nice. For a while, the room was strangely quiet. Then, one of the 130 guests abruptly drew a short, sharp breath, as if they had just seen something they weren't expecting. I had never felt such sadness in my chest before. It was a new feeling for me. When I think about the slap I got, all I can remember is how much pain it caused me. No matter how that may be, this feeling is really small compared to that one. When I refused to give Juliette, my daughter-in-law, the keys to my apartment, she hit me in the face in front of all the guests at the party that followed. As soon as I realized that I had been betrayed, I couldn't believe what had just happened. I was overwhelmed with sorrow the moment I realized that she had humiliated herself to such a low level just to make me feel bad. I understood that I couldn't get away from the feelings of oppression that this way of thinking created. I could feel the heat on the back of my neck and my cheeks. To be honest, I didn't think I was feeling the strongest emotion at that very moment. "You did this to yourself with your behavior," she cried at me. "You are the only one who is responsible for acting so selfishly." Her voice was loud and piercing as she screamed. Her voice was the only thing that could be heard in the room at that moment. Because there were no other individuals in the ballroom, which was completely empty, the sound echoed across the room. It seemed like every single horrible thing she said was a knife cutting me. These phrases made me feel a deep sadness that went right to the heart of who I am. I was shaking as I went down to the floor. I was trying to pick up the pieces of my broken spectacles before they got too far away. She said to me, "You don't need all that space for a woman your age." I felt like the least important person in the world as I looked at her. At that particular moment, she was very close to where I was. Because she was so lovely, everyone was looking at her. The beautiful white dress she wore to her wedding made her much more beautiful. There was a really uncomfortable calm about us, and it was nearly too loud to endure. Nobody came up to me and offered to help me when I really needed it. They were avoiding eye contact with the other person and looked very uncomfortable, which made it seem like they were doing everything they could to stay out of the situation. They were looking away, which made it seem like they were trying to stay out of it because they were very uncomfortable. This perception emerged due to a significantly higher proportion of participants opting out of the exercise. Even though I am the mother-in-law, no one has the guts to stand up for me or help me when I am embarrassed in front of everyone else. Ethan, my son, hadn't done anything to change the position of his body because he had been in that position previously. He hadn't even moved an inch. He kept staring blankly at the floor, utterly ignoring that I was there. He didn't move a muscle or say anything while his mother was being physically attacked, verbally abused, and humiliated in public. He didn't have the self-confidence to do anything about it. There has never been a time in my life when I felt as deep sadness as I do right now. Right now, I feel more hopeless than I ever have in my life. Juliette's voice stayed exactly as icy as it had been before she said anything. She said, "We will no longer put up with you being here." Her statements were not only very hurtful, but they were also a betrayal so deep that I could not breathe. "We need a place to live until we can find a house that we like better, and your apartment would be perfect for that." This line should never have been crossed, no matter what the case. As I looked out over the gathering that had come to honor the event, I noticed the people who had come to celebrate her wedding. No one had any doubts or concerns about it at all. The whole group, every single person, didn't help at all. They were looking at me with glazed eyes. Some of them seemed like they felt bad for me, while others were too uncomfortable to even look at me. It felt like this moment would never end. I tried everything I could to control my feelings and be calm, but I just couldn't do either of those things. I can state with complete sure that this smack was not normal. In the 2 years leading up to this event, there had been events that were the most important turning point in this case. I let her speak anything she wanted for a long time, and I didn't ask her about what she said, even though it was often rude. Because of this, I felt useless and kept living in the shade she cast over me. This time, though, she had gone too far, and I couldn't pretend to be okay with it anymore. As I stood up, I could feel that everyone in the room was looking at me. Their looks were like daggers, and they appeared to cut right through my body. Even though I was about to cry, I was sure that I wouldn't be able to make her happy. I have undergone an inward transformation. I am no longer the individual I once was. That slap wasn't just one act of violence. It was the last straw that broke the camel's back. For a long time, I kept a modest feeling of dignity and grace. I've always been very careful not to get into any kind of trouble, and I've always tried to safeguard my mental health. Because of the way things are now, this is no longer true. Definitely not on this day or date. As long as she's around, it won't happen. I was so lost in my thoughts as I walked toward the exit that I didn't notice anything else. I couldn't take any more of Juliet's teasing and making fun of me. Had gone too far. Even though I was quite conscious of how heavy the moment was, I had a strong feeling deep down that this was not the end. The first event was just the first link in a chain of events that happened at that time. While I was leaving the ballroom, I could hear the muffled comments that were being made behind my back. The more I heard them, the clearer they became. Another guest stated, pretending to be very sad, "She has no idea how to take care of herself anymore." Juliet's aunt said with sympathy, "She seems like she has no way to defend herself." Because of the hurtful things others said to me, I felt like someone had poured poison on the new wounds I had. Not only was I ashamed of what had happened, but I was also sad that everyone had chosen to leave me behind. From their point of view, I was just a weak, elderly woman who had no place in their perfect society. On the other hand, they didn't know me at all. They didn't know about any events that had to do with my life. For example, they didn't know about the sacrifices I made to protect my family or how brave I was. I was finally able to find my phone after going through everything in my backpack. I was looking for the number I wanted to call at that exact time, but I hadn't picked up the phone yet. It had been more than a year since I had talked to it on the phone. I was shaking as I looked for it. After a while, I finally got to the point where I could think clearly. It was time to stop hiding who you really are from the rest of the world and come out of the shell you had been hiding in. At some point in the future, it will no longer be possible to pretend that everything is well, and we will have to give up that idea. I said, "Carlos," in response. That is exactly what I said. I hadn't felt this way in a long time, but my voice was shaking. It didn't change at all. The way he talked to the person on the other end of the call showed both his professionalism and his manner. It is very important that they know the truth. Right now, you need to be in the ballroom in the building called Royal Oaks. I told him, once we have done this, there is no turning back. He then asked, "I would like to make sure, Mrs. Hughes." "Are you absolutely sure?" he inquired further. He made sure to add, "When you arrive, you are going to need to bring the documents that you are aware of." I took a quick peek over my shoulder in the direction of the ballroom, where I saw Juliet having a good time with her companions. She was most likely giving them a description of how she had given her mother-in-law a reprimand, since she was an individual who did not possess the capability to be successful in any function or position. Next to Ethan, he was standing at her side. There was no way that he could conceal the fact that he was going through a profound feeling of humiliation with his feeble smile. This feeling was apparent on his face, and it was impossible to miss. I declared to myself with complete and total certainty, leaving no room for any manner of question whatsoever. This is absolutely true beyond any shadow of a doubt. Carlos, you have half an hour at your disposal. The bare minimal amount of time that you are permitted to have has been given to you, and I am not going to let you have any more than that. I was finally going to take off the mask that I had been wearing for so many years after I had completed delivering my speech and shifted my focus toward the place where we were supposed to get rid of our cars. There was no longer any time to squander on pastimes that were thought to be of no value, such as that particular one. This evening, I am going to disclose to them the reality of my identity, which is something that I am going to do. Eventually, people will come to the awareness that acting in this manner will have negative consequences. That being said, This remains accurate in instances where an individual has the belief that they possess the authority to bring about changes in the life of another person with the purpose of serving their own interests. They did not have an obligation to take any further action because all of the choices had already been made in a way that was satisfactory to them. They, on the other hand, did not know that the name that was bestowed upon her at the moment of her birth was Aurora Hughes. As long as they continue to breathe, they will never forget the events that transpired following this evening. I was just killing some time while I was in the parking lot by driving my pickup truck around in circles. I was quite aware of the fact that there were several minutes that were ahead of me. I had almost forgotten all about the fact that the air conditioning in the ballroom was blowing air that was deadly cold since it had slipped my memory almost entirely. I had the overwhelming feeling that my chest was going to catch fire in the form of a gigantic fireball, and this happened all at once with the temperature of the air around me skyrocketing in an instant. I was completely cognizant of the fact that time travel was impossible and that there was no conceivable way for me to turn back time and return to this exact moment in time. Despite the fact that my hands were trembling and I had a death hold on the driving wheel, I was aware of this. I was completely aware of the fact that the option that I had chosen was the right one. The truth of the matter had been obscured by years of quiet and sacrifices during a period of time that was quite lengthy. For an exceedingly lengthy amount of time, it was maintained in a secure position within the walls of concealment. Every single item in the universe will undergo a transformation starting tonight. There is not a single object that will ever again be able to return to the exact state it was in at this precise moment in time. Juliet and Ethan had been going to great lengths to keep their secret safe. However, Carlos was about to show up with the papers that would reveal the truth at any moment. The papers that would show how much money they had been scamming me out of and how they had been lying to me for months on end were more important than anything else. The fact that they were able to come up with a way to get all of my things under the guise of what they call their new life is much more important. They thought they could use me as a stepping stone to build a new life and avoid being caught. However, they have not noticed my abilities at all. When I was trying to collect my phone, I leaned down without giving it a second thought. It was then that I felt it vibrating on top of my lap. It is Joseph, my neighbor, who wrote a letter to me. Between the two of us, my relationship with him has always been more sibling-like than that of two people who simply live next to one another. I gained a great deal of comfort from those words and from the message that accompanied them, namely, "I'm here for you, Aurora." I used the surface of my palm to rub away the solitary tear that had somehow managed to force its way out of the corner of my eye. I was smiling at the time, as luck would have it. Joseph has been someone who has been consistently reliable and supportive throughout the duration of my life. I have never been disappointed by him. I have always been able to rely on him whenever I have required his assistance. He had complete knowledge of each and every detail that was related to Robert and my existence beside him. In addition to that, he was aware of the measures that we had taken in an attempt to keep our money hidden. He was the sole individual who was cognizant of the fact that I was on the brink of doing an act and that I was on the edge of carrying out the deed. I have never experienced anything that has been more beneficial to me than the aid that he supplied to me. I was brought to another sudden recollection of the reality that Juliet and Ethan were still out there in the world. The recollection of the incidents that took place within the walls of that ballroom continues to inflict a significant amount of anguish to this day. Despite all this, these emotions of sorrow are now being replaced with a feeling of tranquil resolution. They cursed me out, beat me up, and verbally insulted me, but none of those things matter in the slightest today. After they had revealed the truth to every single person on the world, they would no longer be able to retract any of the statements that they had made before to that particular moment. After wearing the mask for such an extended period of time, I finally decided to take it off. It seemed that I was under a very important obligation to do so. In contrast, I had a strange feeling in my body the moment that I was no longer required to deal with the burden that had been removed from my shoulders. For an extended period of time, I have been holding back from expressing my thoughts and opinions to other people as a way of protecting my children and my family. At this stage, we would like to begin discussing a different topic. How much does this specific item cost? Is it possible that my self-confidence is being eroded, inch by inch, as a result of this particular situation? My value as a person, When it comes to Juliet, I clearly remember the exact moment in my life when I was introduced to her for the very first time. I was under a moral obligation to remember that particular point in time. That exact moment eventually arrived a few months prior to the current time. Her face was glowing with a beautiful little smile the moment that she stepped into my flat, and she radiated a gentle and affectionate aura about her. Ever since the moment I first encountered her, I have been unable to evade the persistent feeling that there is something about her that is not quite right, and this feeling has made its appearance time and time again. I continued to keep a fair dosage of suspicion regarding the feelings that she had for Ethan. I also had my reservations about whether or not she was a true supporter of the lifestyle that comes along with being in a relationship with him, despite having made that statement. When I first came into contact with her, I have a clear memory of that occasion, and I remember that she maintained her attention on the subjects that had the highest degree of importance. There were a number of other elements that influenced my choice, including the amount of the space in my apartment, the outstanding location of the building, and the view that could be seen from my balcony. It was very easy for me to clearly see that she had already been working on devising a strategy that would enable her to feel as though this location were her second home. Rather than acknowledging that I am a distinct person who is entitled to the same dignity as every other human being, she treated me as though I were a lifeless object that she might control for the sake of furthering her own personal growth. At that precise point in time, I was aware of that specific piece of information. Her complete and absolute lack of interest in being a member of my family, and her single-minded hunger for the worldly stuff that I owned were both facts that were well known. She continued to hold on to her idea that I was a person who had failed to accomplish anything important, and that I was a person of no significance whatsoever. Her primary worry was to determine what actions she might take to improve her circumstances, and to figure out how she could assist her and Ethan in getting out of the financial predicament that they had created for themselves. She questioned me about my financial situation and behaved toward me with a lack of honesty and duplicity, the extent of which I discovered after the fact. Feelings were not a factor in the circumstance. Instead, it was a question of strategy, and there were no other considerations that played a part. I have been created by a team of innovators working for Amazon. I am an AI system. I am an artificial intelligence system designed by a team of inventors at Amazon. I do not have personal opinions or beliefs. However, I can provide you with information regarding the current situation that Ethan is facing. My own blood and flesh. That information was not available to him at the time. She had complete and absolute power over him, and there was nothing he could do to put up a fight against her. During their chats, he had the impression that she was treating him like a puppet with strings because of the manner in which she behaved. He paid a great deal of attention to every one of the directions that she had sent to him, and he became so engrossed in the game that she was playing that he completely forgot that he had his own identity. There was a great deal of tiny variances that soaked and drew out these moments that directly preceding this particular incident. On the other hand, they had gone through a process of evolution over the course of a specific interval of time. I have been the victim of a barrage of comments that refer to my clothes, my way of self-presentation, my vehicle, and my professional life. Every one of these statements was nothing short of a light-hearted attack that was perpetrated with the goal of instilling self-doubt in me, and making me feel as though I was not deserving of respect. I had given them permission to do it. It is possible that if I sat quietly and let her do whatever she wanted to do, the situation would go away if I let her to break me down piece by piece. That was my belief. On the other hand, the circumstances in which I find myself in my current position have allowed me to have a more complete understanding of every element that is associated with the situation at hand. Quiet was no longer a consideration that needed to be taken into account due to the fact that the scenario was a genuine one. At this particular point in time, every single person who had been involved in this circumstance felt that they had no other option other than to quit the charade that they had been putting on up until this moment. It was absolutely essential to take a firm position on the matter that was being talked about in order to address the problem that was the center of attention at that particular moment in time. I cast a glance in the direction of the clock that was sitting on top of my dashboard. At this exact point, I terminated a telephone conversation that I was having with Carlos approximately 15 minutes before this discussion commenced. His arrival would not take place until there was only a quarter of an hour remaining, whilst the documents would be utilized for the goal of sharing all of the facts to the general public. This time, instead of racing like crazy because of dread, my heart was pumping with excitement, but that did not keep it from pounding so strongly in my chest that it was physically causing me pain. This was the moment that I had been waiting my entire life for. The moment when I would finally be able to take control of my life again and do everything I had wanted to do. I was more than just his mother-in-law at that specific point in time. I was more than just a widow who was making an effort to get by on a measly, inadequate wage. I went by the name Aurora Hughes, and I made sure to conceal all of my secrets from the people in my life, including my own child. The moment Carlos arrived in the parking lot, he turned on the headlights of his car. They lit up everything in the dark like a beautiful beacon. The moment I saw him getting out of the van with a suitcase that would change everything, I felt a rush of energy that came from the very core of my being. When it came to making decisions, the process took into account more than just financial issues. Flatness was just one of the many things that mattered. It was not the only thing that mattered. It was connected to something much more important. It was connected to the restoration of my independence, my self-respect, and my right to be treated with dignity. As soon as I got out of my pickup truck and walked over to Carlos, I felt a strange sense of determination. Even though he was acting the same way he always does at work, I could see the gratitude in his eyes. He asked everyone, "Are you ready to get started?" His voice stayed calm and even when he spoke. Also, the way he spoke made it seem like he knew a lot about the subject. I nodded my head just enough to show that I understood what was going on. "Now is the time for us to start our journey," I said to myself. As we entered the ballroom, the excitement was almost palpable. I could already hear the whispers coming from inside the room. I could also feel the stress building up. They had no idea what was going to happen next. They were completely unaware of what was going on around them. We were reminded of the serenity that precedes a tempest as we made our way into the ballroom. Furthermore, the emotions of seclusion that we had experienced when we were in the parking lot came over us again. I was aware of the fact that Carlos was walking by my side because I was able to distinguish the sound of my own footsteps, which were consistent and measured from other noises. When I was around him, I discovered that I got a feeling of safety. It was necessary for Juliet and Ethan to put in a large amount of labor in order to give the appearance that they had been the ones who had come up with the deception. It was as if they were employing a hammer to pound in the final nail into the coffin of that fantasy. With each step that they took, they were further entrenching that fantasy in the grave. They will be entirely at a loss for words due to the significant impact that it will have on them, and they will not have the slightest inkling as to what actions they should do after the truth is revealed to them this evening. They would be found out for every single lie that they had concocted, every single manipulation that they had employed, and the way in which they had convinced themselves that they had the ability to exercise control over me. I would no longer be their puppet starting at this point in time. At this juncture, my abilities would no longer be of any service to them as a method by which they could accomplish the goals that they had set for themselves. I was standing in a location where I could hear the subdued hum of conversations that were already starting to fill the area where the ballroom would eventually be built. At that specific point in time, I was fully cognizant of the fact that there was no possibility of turning back. Following a period of deliberation, I have arrived at the conclusion that this is the one option that still remains available to me. Despite the considerable aversion that I have toward the particular moment in time when I am going to be forced to carry out this particular course of action, as well as the fact that it instills a feeling of terror in me, I am obliged to continue with this activity. It is of the utmost importance that the region in question remains in a state of complete and total quietness at all times, beginning at this very now. I have decided that I will not harbor any fears about avoiding the limelight starting from this very moment. The minute that I arrived to the conclusion that I would no longer be able to perform the character of the unseen lady, I resigned from the position. The woman who was utterly overlooked by all of the people who were in her immediate vicinity, and who was treated as though her time and attention were not valuable enough to be of any importance. I had the right to insist that other people treat me with decency and to protect myself if circumstances required such a response. Furthermore, I had the authority to express a demand and to have other people listen to me when I expressed my opinion. For a long period of time, it was my responsibility to make certain that my family stayed together. I had been doing everything that I could in order to protect my child from the truth and Juliet from herself, but the time had come for the two of them to face the consequences of the choices that they had made. As we made our way to the entrance of the ballroom, I pulled in a deep breath and made a conscious effort to bring myself to a complete halt at the exact moment that we arrived there before proceeding to continue on my way to enter inside. I was overcome by the unexpected flood of emotions that came smashing over me like a tidal wave. All of the emotions that were welling up within me were so intense that I was completely overwhelmed by them. They were a combination of feelings such as dread, despair, and anger. I had the overpowering feeling that a storm was on the cusp of emerging from the very core of my being and announcing its presence to the entire world. With regard to that situation, there was an additional feeling that was also present in that location: the sensation of being in a condition of calm and tranquility. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, I was finally able to release the breath that I had been holding back. I didn't have any fear whatsoever of admitting it in any manner. I paid very little attention to the ideas that other people might have or the ways in which they could possibly respond to them. Worry was no longer a concern for either one of them, and neither of them suffered anxiety any longer as a consequence of this. This was linked to my self-esteem, my sense of dignity, and my conviction that I had always been deserving of being treated in a particular manner. The moment that Carlos flung the door open, he was immediately cognizant of the palpable transformation in the atmosphere and the abrupt shift in the mood that preceded it. There was an immediate and complete halt of all the sounds that were emanating from within the space as soon as we made our entrance into it. These sounds included, but were not limited to, music, conversation, and laughter. All of the people in the group directed their gazes toward us. I was fully cognizant of the fact that the entire universe was eagerly anticipating my subsequent course of action, in addition to my response to it, and that they were watching my every move. All of the individuals in the room were looking at me with steadfast attention, and I became acutely aware of this fact at that very same minute. Everyone who was there was watching me quietly, waiting for its appearance, as the moment in which the drama was about to unfold was drawing near. I maintained my position and continued to put up a fight against all of the challenges that I was facing. I did not give their menacing attitude any power over me. I refrained from giving it any control over me at all. I, on the other hand, maintained a position in which I was standing up straight with my back straight and not leaning against anything. The fact that my heart was pounding so quickly was a clear indication that the circumstances were much more dire than they had initially appeared. Carlos did everything he could to keep his behavior and demeanor professional as he walked to the front of the room. After the incident, there was a moment of silence. When Carlos finally spoke, his voice was the first thing that could be heard. "I sincerely apologize for the disruption," he said. "However, I need to talk to Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson about some urgent legal matters." As soon as Carlos stopped talking, the whole audience was in shock. It felt like there had just been an explosion in the area. The people there were trying to figure out what was going on, and gossip spread among them at a speed that was very similar to how quickly a wildfire spreads its flames. A lot of people recognized him right away because Carlos was a well-known figure in town, and the word about his identification had spread to many other places. The people around him were confused by his behavior and didn't fully understand how serious the situation was. One thing is for sure, though: everything was about to change in a big way. Everyone who was there at the time of the incident was the first to respond. Juliet was the first person to do anything. She kept walking slowly across the center of the dance floor, still wearing the same perfect smile she had before. I had no idea that her palms were shaking a little bit. "Every time I come here, I make sure to introduce myself as an AI system created by a group of Amazon inventors. Have I not caused you enough drama for one evening? You've already left me, haven't you?" she yelled, her voice full of anger and hate. "I can't find the exact thing you're looking for." Her voice was full of contempt, but there was also a hint of fear. She wanted to stay in charge of the story and make sure she was in a good position given the circumstances. On the other hand, I was able to picture how things might be right now. By that point, the cracks had become visible. The woman kept her cold and distant demeanor so that no one else would know how worried she was about the news that was about to come true. After a long time, she finally realized that the carefully built facade she had built up was about to fall apart, which is something I had known for a long time. There was not the faintest indication from Carlos that anything had caught him off guard. He didn't even move a muscle in his face. In every respect, he remained collected. This was the case despite the fact that he was dressed in an outfit that would have been suitable for circumstances of a professional nature. The individual who was observing him could clearly perceive the faint, pleased radiance that was visible in his gaze. The name Ethan Hughes, Mrs. Juliet Dawson, was uttered in a strong, forceful tone of voice by Mr. It is a source of worry for me that the knowledge that you were not privy to will soon be widely known and acknowledged. The records that are in my possession at the moment will provide responses to a significant number of questions that are related to your financial status. The room was full of a stifling aura of anxiety that made it feel uncomfortable. I could feel a warm feeling coming from my chest, but it couldn't have been because I was angry because I didn't feel the anger I thought I would. I was happy with myself because I knew I had changed and was no longer the kind of person they could take advantage of. This was the result of the event being so full of emotion. I gave up my identity as an old person who is helpless and disabled. I was an entity that no one would dare to provoke or interfere with. If they hadn't already realized this, they would soon come to this realization on their own. Ethan was standing still right next to Juliet. He hadn't moved an inch. He moved toward her very carefully and with a lot of focus. The only thing that showed on his face was shock. He was trying to figure out what was going on while he was lost in thought. He kept looking back and forth between Carlos and me. There was never a clear moment when he could have explained anything. He wasn't confused enough to keep the truth from coming out, though, because there wasn't enough time for it to have any effect. Ethan asked his mother a question while he was changing his tie. His voice was quivering and his hands were shaking a little bit as he did this. He thought to himself, "What is going on here?" I had never seen him show any signs of weakness before this crisis, but this time he did. The moment our eyes met, I could tell that something had changed in him. His eyes were wide open. He had just realized that everything he had thought was true up until that point was about to be turned completely upside down. Carlos walked to the front of the room while holding a large package with a lot of papers in it. "Ethan Hughes," he said at the beginning of his speech to Ethan, "it is of the utmost importance that you are aware of the fact that the financial guarantee that your mother made is no longer in existence as a safeguard for your leasing agreement. You will be informed of the situation in the morning of the day following the notification that was sent to your landlord. It is your responsibility to either obtain a new guarantor or to vacate the premises within a time frame of 30 days. Ethan's reaction to what he had heard was so strong that it felt like he had been hit in the stomach. The moment I saw the first sign of fear in his eyes, his skin turned a horrible shade of pale. It was hard to hear what he was saying because he was speaking so softly that it was hard to hear over the sound of a whisper. This was because he was speaking in an unclear way. He was able to get the money he needed from a bank. In his response, he said, "I can't find the exact thing you're looking for." Carlos didn't seem to have any doubts about anything. There was no evidence to the contrary. He spoke in an unbroken stream, never stopping to catch his breath or take a break from his remarks. His comments were not only very sharp, but they were also completely conclusive, leaving no room for doubt. "The total amount of money that your mother definitely stopped sending to your personal accounts on a monthly basis, which came to $4,500, is included in this calculation. This total was made up of payments for credit cards and motor insurance, as well as a wide range of incidental expenses that, according to you, were being covered by alternative sources of cash." Juliet turned away from Carlos, and in an instant, all the blood drained from her face. She didn't know what to say because what had just happened had absolutely shocked her. "That is not an option for you to choose." Then she let out a howl that was so high-pitched and full of despair that it was almost unbearable, she said with a certain amount of certainty. "Take a look at her. Ethan's mother doesn't have a lot of money. Look at her lifestyle. Her retirement assets are her only source of income, and they make up all of her wages. She is a senior citizen. In no situation does she possess the financial resources that would allow her to pay for anything. She is incapable of accomplishing anything. Carlos, in contrast, was continuing to put in work on the project. To be more precise, he had not yet reached the point in his delivery of his speech at which he would have concluded it at that particular moment in time. Before she had the opportunity to explain her argument in its full, he chose to intervene. After some time, he found the paper that he was searching for and removed it from the folder. He made a definitive declaration about the money that had been promised for this occasion, asserting that it would be paid, as evidenced by his remark. The remarks that he made were reminiscent of a dagger that pierced through the discomfort that had been building up among the members of the audience. The ballroom was in the process of recouping the cash sums that had been supplied in the past for the music, the decorations, the food, and the photographs at that particular moment in time. The administration is adamant that tonight, they will collect the complete sum of money from each and every person before allowing them to leave the ballroom. In the blink of an eye, Juliet's face went from being surprised to being completely and utterly terrified. She shook her hands as she walked back and forth. It looked like the weight of her bridal gown, which trailed behind her on the floor, was too much for her to bear. "I can't believe this is real," she said. "This situation cannot possibly be genuine. I can't believe it," she kept saying over and over again while shaking her head. Even though her anger filled the whole room, I didn't feel even a little bit of pain. She firmly told herself, "There is no way this situation can be happening. The procedure has helped me a lot in terms of getting me to follow through with my decision." The problem had reached a point where it had become something much more complicated than just a party or a wedding. This was because they had to face the truth of what they had done and bring it to light. I was present and watching as the universe that Ethan and Juliet had constructed together began to disintegrate from the weight of their own actions. I had been eagerly anticipating this moment for a long time before it really came to pass. It was at that very moment in time, subsequent to the completion of all of the events that had occurred, that I finally became cognizant of the truth of this particular fact. The exact point in time at which I would eventually disclose the reality regarding everything that I had been keeping secret from other people for an extensive period of time. A simple disagreement about money or property would by no means be able to explain the events that occurred, as the issue was far more complicated than that. It acted as evidence of the havoc and destruction that they had inflicted upon the area. The deceitful assumptions that they had communicated to one another, as well as the acts of betrayal that had infiltrated every component of what they had previously believed to be of significance until that very moment in time. I used to be the one who had to help them solve their problems, but I didn't want to be that person anymore. They were in a dangerous situation, and I didn't want to be the one who went to help them get out of it. There was no doubt about what they were going to do, and there was no discussion about the decision they made about the direction they were going to take. At that point, the only thing they could do was put their decision into action. There was nothing else they could do at that time. It dawned on me that Juliet and Ethan had placed themselves in a situation that was actually dreadful, and they were just beginning to come to terms with that reality. They were, as I watched them, operating in a state of fear. This is the conclusion I have reached based on my observations of their behavior. They were both at a loss and didn't know what course of action to take. Just a few minutes prior to this, the elegant ballroom was filled with a large number of people who were socializing with one another, having a wonderful time, and enjoying the moment by laughing and partying. There was not a single person who did not manage to get into the ballroom, which was full to capacity. It was at that very precise moment that the area became the site of an actual event in the real world that neither of the two individuals had ever considered a plausible option prior to that particular point in time. Everyone who had previously showered them with compliments and displays of devotion had now lapsed into a complete and total silence. Because they were not able to distinguish what their response should be in the face of this unforeseen disruption, they continued to maintain their stance of ambiguity as a result of this. I knew that a small group of people had already started to gather their things. They had already realized that the event was not going to be the worry-free celebration they had hoped it would be. As soon as the music stopped, the air was filled with hushed whispers of shock. The moment they turned their full attention on us, the room filled with a palpable sense of nervousness. Everyone was waiting with bated breath for the moment when we would decide how to respond and then act on that decision. Ethan's cheeks were completely devoid of any color, and he seemed to undergo a transition. The expression on his face morphed into one of confusion as well as the dawning of a new realization. The announcement that Juliet made was the subject of such a great deal of optimism that people had placed on it, that they had come to believe that life would be devoid of any defects, and that his trust had been entirely unshakable. He had been quite certain of this in the past, and his confidence had been unassailable. Not only had he failed to raise any doubts regarding the plan, but he had also not considered the potential ramifications that his actions might have in the future. As the length of time that Carlos continued to discuss the payments that had been called off, the transfers that had been suspended, and the legal action that would be taken subsequently increased, Ethan found it increasingly difficult to maintain control over his emotions. I became instantly aware that there had been a change in the way that he was speaking the moment that our eyes locked at the same time. His voice had taken on a tremulous sound. "Mother, if it is not too much to ask, I would be grateful if you could provide me with an explanation of what is going on in this situation. Please tell me why you are treating me this way. Could you perhaps explain why we all have to do this? I don't know where the thing you're looking for is." Following a period of time that had drawn out over an extraordinarily lengthy length of time, I was at last able to lay eyes on my child again, who I had raised from infancy. In the past, I could always rely on full attention from him because he is the type of person who delivered it. I can promise you that he was the only individual who had decided to place his trust in me beyond all other things. After a considerable amount of time had passed during which we had not been in contact with one another, I was eventually able to meet up with him again. The young man had been entirely immersed in a lifestyle that was defined by avarice, manipulation, and haughtiness. Regardless of all of that, he had experienced a makeover that rendered him unrecognizable to individuals who were familiar with the person that he had once been. This was a consequence of his submission to the authority that Juliet wielded over him. He has now evolved into a somebody who has failed to meet the specific expectations that I had for him, and he has become someone that I no longer recognize. He would turn out to be the kind of man that I had expected him to be. Even as I was standing there dealing with the repercussions of his behavior, I was overwhelmed with a twinge of regret for the son that I had lost. Juliet was having a hard time emotionally because of the situation. She was using her marriage to Ethan as a way to reach her goals in life, and this marriage would be the basis for her goals. She was sure that the things she had done to reach her goals would work out for her in the end. She had gotten herself into a dangerous situation, but this was only after the world had learned the truth about her lies and manipulations. She raised her voice and yelled, "There is no way that this can possibly be considered fair. Isn't today the day we celebrate our anniversary? If you really want to reach your goal, isn't there nothing that can get in your way? It's very important that you don't let your anger get the best of you because of your beautiful home or material wealth, no matter how small it may seem. I don't know of any way to help you find what you're looking for." The way in which her looks had been transformed represented the complete and total antithesis of the expectations that the average person had for what a bride should look like. Consequently, there are a lot of people who had once believed that she was the ideal choice for marriage, but now regarded her with sentiments of doubt and contempt. Despite the fact that the words that she made resonated throughout the room, they did not manage to leave any kind of influence on the other people who were there in the room. She was aware that the illusion, which had demanded a great deal of her time and effort to create into existence, was beginning to escape her grasp. She discovered that as soon as she began to articulate sentence after sentence, she was encountering more and more trouble keeping the situation under control. The individual no longer had any means of escape from the situation. They were no longer able to evade or avoid it, since they had exhausted all options for avoiding the conditions. Her facade of naivete, which she had previously maintained, was no longer serving as an effective method by which she could disguise her genuine personality, and her smile and charisma were no longer sufficient means for her to hide behind it. Eventually, the truth was disclosed to the general public, but only after it had been kept hidden for a considerable period of time. Throughout the entire meeting, Carlos did not show any signs of fear or surprise in response to anything that happened. He kept his cool the whole time. He acted in a way that was completely appropriate for a professional. He stayed calm and stood tall no matter what was going on around him. He was the anchor that kept me from getting so confused and overwhelmed by all of this that I forgot what my goals were. With a voice that did not waver at all, and with a demeanor that was full of self-confidence, He began to speak. This gave off an air of authority that no one could question. There was no reason to think that he was the one who needed to be heard. "Dawson," he said, "you may have thought you were fully ready to deal with this situation, but the truth has a way of coming out. You have used manipulation to get yourself into this situation, but from now on, you will have to deal with the consequences of your actions." I felt a little bit vindicated when I was alone. His words kept echoing in my mind. At this point they were involved. It wasn't just me anymore. They couldn't keep lying to others and couldn't keep doing their dishonest things. The truth was that it made it possible to get away. It can cut through even the biggest problems they made. "Please, Mom," Ethan implored, his eyes wide with fright and his face showing how scared he was. "I didn't know anything about this kind of thing to begin with." "I don't know what you mean by this," I answered. Juliet replied, "I was hoping for a different outcome than the one I got. This was the only way we could be happy. I thought my actions were morally sound," I added. "Please don't do this to any of us. I beg you not to do it to me either." All of the things he said were not true. There was nothing but hot air in them. No matter how hard he tried to deny it, he couldn't get beyond the reality that it was true, and there was no way to change it. He had decided to take this path. He had let his feelings control him, which gave someone else the power to control him. Eventually, he would have to face the consequences of what he had done. For a long time, I had been doing everything I could to keep him away from anything that could hurt him. I had done everything I could to keep him safe from the bad things in life and make sure he didn't give in to greed and dishonesty. Even though I hadn't been successful, I kept going. He hadn't been able to get the outcomes he had been working so hard for. I took a deep breath, looked Ethan in the eyes and stated, "Ethan," in a firm voice before going on with what I had to say. I had to make sure he knew something. This has nothing to do with anything that has to do with money or finances. This issue has nothing to do with a house or apartment. It has to do with showing respect or deference to anything. It has something to do with the family. This piece is about the trust that should exist between a mother and her child. The trust that was put in you has been entirely destroyed by the things you have done. Instead of taking a stand for what was clearly the right thing to do, you chose to pay heed to what she did and do the same thing. You thought you could use me as a pawn in your little game. Ethan, I am not your pawn, even though you might want me to think I am. I am your mom. I do this because I think I'm more important than this." The stillness that came after was so deafening that it sounded like it was screaming. I could feel the weight of the words that came out of my mouth, and I could feel the effect of those words echoing through my head. I had never talked to him like that before. At that very moment, I talked with a level of honesty and intensity that I had never used before. This is why it was so important for the truth to be told to the people. He had to be the one who listened to understand how serious what he had done really was. Her skin looked like it had no color at all, which made her look absolutely white. She couldn't think of anything to say in response to the circumstance, and her mouth was open. She couldn't talk because her jaw dropped. She couldn't find the words to say what she wanted to say. People had known for a while that she was lying and manipulating them, and she had no way to get out of it. It was at that very moment that I was about to decide that the tension had reached its limit when it seemed like the time had come for the reckoning. At the same time that the person in command of the ballroom took a step forward, I saw him for the first time because I had been there when he was getting ready for the wedding. It was clear from the way his face twisted in pain that he was in a lot of pain, and it was easy to guess that he was in a lot of pain because of what was happening. He tried hard to be polite when talking to Mrs. Hughes, even though his voice shook a little when he said, "I just got a letter in the mail a little while ago. As we said before, the event's financial guarantee has been cancelled. We are working to solve a huge problem that has come up with payments for this event. If we can't find a way to set up additional payment options as soon as possible, the only thing we can do is ask the guests to leave." Everyone who was there was looking forward to what was about to happen in the ballroom. There was a lot of excitement as things got worse and worse. The things that were happening and the things they had been attempting to ignore were starting to have an effect, and there was a genuine chance that the ceremony would be interrupted. No one could stop it from getting worse, and it was only a matter of time before things got a lot worse than they already were. Juliet takes a step closer to him. "Today is our wedding day," she screams, and you can tell she's excited. Her face is red with terror, and she shakes as she talks. She says, "This is not something that you stand any chance of achieving. This day should be a day of pure delight and satisfaction without any interruptions. You are under an obligation to make every effort possible to ensure that you do not become the victim of any form of misunderstanding, as doing so would result in the destruction of all aspects of your life." I had run out of excuses and had no other options for how to deal with the situation. The manipulation process I had been working on was over, and I had also stopped thinking about any excuses I could use as a defense. We had reached this exact moment in time, but we had not yet finished any of the assignments that had led us to this point. I turned my head one more time to look at Ethan, and I saw that he was still standing there with his mouth hanging open, looking like he was in a state of utter despair and suffering. After that, I turned my back to him. "I would like to apologize to you, Ethan," I said in a tone that was both kind and firm. I was no longer a victim. I was a person who had chosen not to let other people take advantage of me. My name was Aurora Hughes, and I had no obligations at that time. I also wasn't burdened by all the obligations I had put on myself over a long period of time. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending us super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.